It was supposed to be a peaceful morning on my ranch, but it quickly turned into a nightmare. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly, dozens of texts and missed calls. I groggily checked the screen and saw a message from my neighbor. The HOA is calling the cops on your property. They say you're trespassing. My heart sank. This wasn't the first time ID had a run-in with the HOA, but this time it was serious. The last thing I expected was to be treated like a criminal on my own land. My name's Jack Thornton. You may think I'm just a regular rancher, but let me tell you, there's a lot more to my story than that. I'm not the kind of guy to let something like this slide. You see, I own more than just this land. I own the HOA that's trying to kick me off my own property. Most people would never guess that, but Karen White, the HOA president, had no idea who she was messing with. She thought she could get away with it, but she was wrong. I've dealt with bullies before, but I never expected one to have so much power, or be so determined to make my life miserable. It all started a few weeks ago when Karen and the HOA started sending me violation notices, accusing me of everything from grass being too tall to my fences not being up to their ridiculous standards. They thought they could push me around, and for a while I thought maybe they could. But when they called the cops on me and tried to tell them I was trespassing on my own land, I realized they had pushed me too far. I quickly gathered all the necessary paperwork. My property deed, my HOA membership documents, everything I needed to remind them that I wasn't just some guy they could boss around. I wasn't about to let Karen and her cronies ruin everything my family had worked so hard for. I walked up to my office and grabbed the file on the HOA I controlled. That's when it hit me, wasn't just any landowner. I held all the cards. I'd been too quiet, too patient for too long. But now it was time to play my hand. I called the local sheriff's office and made sure they knew who was really in charge. When Karen thought she was going to show up and tell the cops I was a trespasser, she had no idea I was the one who owned the land and the HOA. She had no idea the real power was in my hands, not hers. As the sheriff arrived, I could see the disbelief in Karen's eyes when she realized who she was dealing with. It wasn't just a fight over some property violation anymore. This was a battle for respect. I wasn't going to let her push me around any longer. Karen tried to explain, but it was too late. The truth was, she had no idea that I had already set everything up. The sheriff, after looking through my documents, turned to Karen with a stern look. "Ma'am," he said, "this man owns this land and the HOA. You can't just accuse him of trespassing on his own property." I watched as Karen's face turned pale. The tables had turned, and it felt so satisfying to watch her squirm. I had my ranch back, and the last laugh belonged to me. They say justice is blind, but sometimes it's about timing. And today it was mine. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the look on Karen's face after the sheriff stepped in. Her whole demeanor shifted from confident to completely rattled. She had thought she could throw her weight around and make me the villain, but it wasn't going to happen. The sheriff, a tall, no-nonsense guy named Officer Daniels, glanced at the paperwork I handed him and then turned to Karen. "Ma'am," he said in a calm voice, "this man owns this property and the HOA. You don't have a leg to stand on." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she realized she had made a grave mistake. She probably thought that calling the cops would get her what she wanted, but instead it had backfired. As she stood there, her face red with embarrassment, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This was about more than just a simple violation of property rules. It was about respect, and she had crossed the line. "You have no authority here, Karen," I said, the words coming out with a finality that I could feel. "In fact, you're the one who's in violation of HOA rules." The look on her face was priceless. She had no idea what I had up my sleeve. I had spent the last few weeks preparing for this moment, digging through every HOA document, every rule, every clause that could help me. And I found something that would turn the tables on her. As the sheriff turned to me with a slight nod of approval, Karen knew she was in deep trouble. I wasn't just some guy who happened to own land. I was the one with the power to revoke her position and bring the entire HOA to its knees. I suggest you leave now, Karen, I continued. And take this lesson with you. You don't get to control people like you own them. Karen tried to argue, but it was clear she was running out of steam. She knew she had lost, and the more she tried to talk, the more ridiculous it sounded. She sputtered a few empty threats, but the sheriff wasn't having it. That's enough, he said, his voice firm. Let's go, Karen. You've made your point. Watching her walk away, tail between her legs, was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. I had taken control of my land, my ranch, and my reputation. I had taken control of the HOA. I wasn't just a rancher anymore. I was the one who had the power, and Karen's little power trip had ended with her losing everything. As I stood there on my property, the sun shining down, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was my home. This was my land. And no one, not even someone with as much influence as Karen, was going to take it from me. The sheriff left shortly after, reminding me to call him if I needed any further help. But I knew it was over. Karen and her HOA couldn't touch me now. The battle had been won. And I wasn't going to let anyone forget it. The days after Karen's defeat were some of the most peaceful I had experienced on my land. It felt good to finally have control, but I knew this wouldn't be the end. In the back of my mind, I could already sense that Karen wouldn't go down without one last attempt to reclaim her power. Sure enough, a week later I received another letter from the HOA, this time addressed directly to me, not just a general violation notice. The letter was full of legal jargon, accusing me of a breach of HOA rules regarding property boundaries and fines for non-compliance. I rolled my eyes as I read through the nonsense. It was clear they were trying to find anything they could to keep up their facade of authority. I wasn't worried. I knew the law, and more importantly, I knew the power I wielded as the owner of the HOA. Still, I decided to take a moment to strategize. I had dealt with Karen, but there were others in the HOA who would happily back her up if they thought it meant they could regain control. I sat down with a pen and began writing my response. It was a mix of legal talk and straightforward no-nonsense language. I would remind them who was really in charge, and that their attempts to intimidate me were futile. I knew this wouldn't stop Karen or the others from trying again, but I was done playing nice. The letter I sent back was clear. Any further attempts to go after my property would be met with legal action, and I had plenty of resources to back it up. When I sent it, I felt a sense of relief, but deep down I knew this was far from over. The HOA had underestimated me once, and now they would learn that it wasn't just about owning land. It was about knowing how to use the system to your advantage. A couple of days passed before I heard anything. When the phone finally rang, it was Officer Daniels again. "Jack," he said, "we got another complaint. They're accusing you of violating more HOA rules. I've got a feeling this might get ugly again." I sighed but stayed calm. "Don't worry, Officer Daniels," I said, my voice steady. "This time it's going to be different. I wasn't going to let them push me around again. This wasn't about property lines or fences anymore. It was about setting a precedent. I had dealt with Karen once and I had come out on top. Now I would make sure the entire HOA knew exactly who they were dealing with. My plan was simple. Continue to fight back with every resource at my disposal, including the legal knowledge and connections I had developed over the years. If Karen thought she could break me, she was sorely mistaken. As I sat back in my chair, I realized that this was no longer a battle for control of my land. This was about showing them all that no one could bully me off my property, not even the HOA. The next time they tried to take me down, I'd be ready to hit back harder than before. The weeks that followed were tense, but I felt more in control than ever before. I had made it clear to the HOA that I wasn't someone they could just push around. Karen had tried to use her position as president to intimidate me, but I had turned the tables on her, and I wasn't going to stop now. The next move came sooner than I expected. I was sitting in my office reviewing some documents when I heard a knock on the door. I looked up and saw Officer Daniels standing there, his face a little more serious than usual. "Jack, we've got a problem," he said, walking into the room. "Karen and the HOA are making their move again. This time they're not backing down." My heart sank, but I didn't let it show. "What's their latest claim?" I asked, already knowing it wouldn't be good. Officer Daniels handed me a folder, and I flipped through it. The HOA was accusing me of numerous violations, claiming I had not paid fees for property improvements, and even suggesting I was illegally using water rights. It was clear they were pulling out all the stops now. But I wasn't worried. I had everything they needed to back off. "This is just their last-ditch effort to get under my skin," I said, setting the papers down. "They've got nothing." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "You sure? Because I've got a feeling they're going to escalate this one." I sat back in my chair, taking a deep breath. "I'm not going to let them. I've already got my team on this, and I'll hit them with everything I've got." "All right, Jack," Daniels said. "Just be careful. They've got power in high places, and they're going to use it. You might want to keep your guard up." I nodded, appreciating the warning, but I wasn't worried. I had already made my move. The next step was to go public. I knew I couldn't let Karen and the HOA continue to operate in the shadows, trying to bully people into submission. I needed to expose them, to show everyone that I wasn't just fighting for my property, I was fighting for what was right. I spent the next few days gathering every piece of information I could find. I contacted my legal team, checked my property rights again, and looked over every rule in the HOA's charter. I wanted to be sure I was fully prepared. When I walked into the HOA meeting a few days later, I was calm but determined. Karen and the other board members were there, looking smug as usual. They probably thought they were in control, but that was about to change. I stood up, walked to the front of the room, and laid out everything I had discovered. "I know you've been trying to push me around," I said, my voice firm. "But here's the truth. I own this HOA. And am done with your games." The room fell silent. Karen's face turned bright red as she stammered, trying to come up with a response. But it was too late. I had already taken control of the situation, and there was no turning back now. "I've been patient," I continued, "but I won't stand by while you use your power to harass people. If you continue to make false claims against me, I'll take you to court. And I'll win." Karen's eyes darted around the room, and I could see the panic in her expression. She knew I had her cornered. The other board members sat quietly, too afraid to speak up. In that moment, I realized that this battle was no longer about just my property. It was about standing up to corruption, about showing that you don't have to bow down to people who think they can take whatever they want. I left that meeting feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Karen and the HOA had underestimated me, and now they knew who they were really dealing with. The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet tension. Karen and the HOA board had backed off for now, but I could feel the storm brewing. They weren't done, not by a long shot. They might have thought I was a pushover before, but I had made it clear that I wasn't someone they could intimidate. The first sign that they were planning something came when I received another letter. This time it was different. The letter wasn't from the HOA, it was from a lawyer. I could already feel the weight of it in my hands. The letter claimed that I was in violation of several local zoning laws, and the HOA was planning to sue me for damages, seeking to block any further development on my property. I tossed the letter on my desk, staring at it for a few moments. I knew exactly what this was. This wasn't about property violations or rules. This was a last-ditch attempt to get me to sell, to force me to back down. I wasn't going to fall for it. I called my lawyer, a friend of mine named David, and we went over the letter together. As I suspected, the whole thing was flimsy. They were trying to find anything to use against me, but there was nothing concrete in the letter. No real legal grounds. Just a lot of threats. "They're bluffing, Jack," David said on the phone, his voice reassuring. "They're hoping you'll panic and give in, but you've got the upper hand here." I took a deep breath. David was right. I had the law on my side, and I wasn't going to let them scare me. I wasn't just fighting for my property anymore. I was fighting to make a point to show them that they couldn't bully me. The next morning, I walked into the HOA office. Karen was sitting behind her desk, looking like she was expecting me. "Jack," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm glad you could make it." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Karen," I said firmly, "I've seen your lawyer's letter. You're trying to scare me, but it's not going to work." She smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "I'm just doing what's best for the community," she said, her tone shifting to one of mock sympathy. "We're only trying to protect the neighborhood." "Protect the neighborhood?" I raised an eyebrow. "You're trying to take my land, Karen. Don't pretend you care about anyone but yourself." The smile faded from her face. "You don't understand," she said, standing up now, her voice tinged with anger. "This is about control. You've been making a mockery of this community, and I'm not going to let that slide." I leaned forward, looking her square in the eye. "You've already lost, Karen. You don't have the power you think you do." She was quiet for a moment, her face flushed with frustration. "We'll see about that," she muttered, turning away. I knew the battle wasn't over, but for the first time I felt like I was the one in control. I had fought for my land and won. And now I was ready to fight again. This time I wasn't just protecting my property. I was taking back control of my life. As I walked out of the office, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Karen had underestimated me before, and now she was going to learn just how wrong she was. The game had changed, and I was playing to win. The next few days were a whirlwind. After my confrontation with Karen in the HOA office, I knew the calm wouldn't last. She was clearly rattled, but I could see the determination in her eyes. This wasn't over. I had made my stand, but now it was about playing the long game. I spent the next few days preparing for the next phase of this battle. I wasn't going to let the HOA play their games anymore. I had to be strategic, calm, and precise. My lawyer, David, and I spent hours going over every detail, ensuring I was fully prepared for whatever Karen and her board might throw at me next. We went through every piece of paperwork again, double-checking the HOA rules, local laws, and everything in between. I needed to know that if they decided to take it to court, I'd be ready. Karen might have thought she had the upper hand with her lawyer's threats, but I had the law on my side. Then came the bombshell. I received a call from Officer Daniels late one evening. "Jack, you might want to sit down for this," he said, his voice serious. "Karen and the HOA are pushing forward with this. They've officially filed a complaint with the city council, and it's going to go public. They're making you out to be the villain, saying you're breaking zoning laws and disrupting the community." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This was what I had been expecting, but hearing it confirmed was a whole different thing. "I'm ready for it," I said, my voice firm. But I need to get ahead of this. We can't let them control the narrative. Officer Daniels agreed to help where he could, and I knew I'd have to make some moves of my own. The next day, I started preparing for the city council meeting. I wasn't going to sit back and let Karen paint me as the bad guy. I decided to go straight to the source, get the truth out there, and make sure everyone knew what was really going on. I reached out to a local journalist I knew, someone who had always been fair and impartial, and told her everything. She agreed to cover the story and get my side out there before the council meeting. The day of the council meeting came, and it felt like everything was building up to this one moment. Karen was there, sitting with the other HOA board members, looking confident as usual. But I wasn't about to let them control the narrative. As soon as it was my turn to speak, I stood up and walked to the front of the room. The room was packed, people murmuring among themselves, and Karen shot me a look that could have burned a hole in the wall. I didn't flinch. Ladies and gentlemen of the council, I began, my voice clear and steady. I'm here to set the record straight. What you're about to hear is not the truth. Karen White and the HOA are using their power to manipulate the situation and push an agenda that doesn't serve this community. The room fell silent. I could feel the weight of every eye on me, but I kept going. I laid out all the facts. Karen had been harassing me, how the HOA had been using its influence to intimidate others, and how I was not the one in the wrong. I made it clear that I had every right to do what I was doing on my own land, and I wasn't going to back down. The more I spoke, the more I could see the shift in the room. Karen was squirming in her seat, her confident facade starting to crack. The council members, who had initially seemed unsure, were now listening intently. I ended my speech with a simple, powerful statement. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to protect what's mine, and I won't let anyone take it from me. As I sat back down, I could feel the tension in the room start to dissolve. Karen, on the other hand, looked like she had just lost a battle she wasn't ready for. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about standing up for myself and for everyone else who had been bullied by people like her. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally winning. After the city council meeting, I thought the worst was behind me. I had made my case clear, exposed Karen and her board for what they were, and taken control of the situation. But as anyone who's dealt with power-hungry people knows, they don't just give up. I woke up the next morning to a call from my lawyer, David. His voice was more serious than usual. Jack, you need to sit down. It's not over. I could feel a knot tighten in my stomach as I listened to him explain the situation. Apparently, Karen wasn't going to let this go. She had rallied the HOA board behind her and was taking her fight to the next level. This time, they were using their political connections to try and get the local zoning laws changed, essentially making my land non-compliant with the new rules. They're using every card they've got, David said. But we've got one too. You have every right to fight this. We're not going to let them just walk all over you. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. This wasn't just about a few zoning laws. This was about trying to take away everything I had fought for. But this time, I wasn't going to wait for them to make the next move. I was going to beat them at their own game. I spent the next few days researching everything I could about the zoning laws, the political influence Karen had, and any loopholes I could exploit. The deeper I dug, the more I realized how far they were willing to go. Karen was playing a dangerous game, using her connections to manipulate the system, but I wasn't going to let her win. David and I decided to take the offensive. We gathered a team of legal experts, environmental specialists, and local allies who knew the system inside and out. Together, we would fight back not just to protect my land but to expose the corruption within the HOA. We filed a formal complaint, showing how Karen's actions were not only illegal, but were being done to benefit her and the board members personally. It was a big gamble, but I knew it was the only way to win. The pressure started to mount on Karen. The more we pushed back, the more her allies began to back away. The city council started questioning the legality of the zoning changes she had been pushing. And then the tipping point came. A whistleblower from within the HOA reached out to me. This person had seen enough and was ready to expose everything. They had proof that Karen and the board had been using HOA funds for personal projects, funneling money into private deals, and pushing through zoning changes to line their own pockets. The evidence was a game changer. Armed with this new information, we presented it to the council and the press. It didn't take long for the truth to start spreading. Karen's grip on the HOA was slipping fast. The final blow came when the city council called for an emergency meeting to discuss the new findings. By the time it was over, Karen had been removed from her position, and the HOA board was completely overhauled. The community started to breathe a collective sigh of relief as the corruption was finally exposed. As for me, I stood firm on my land, knowing that I had not only protected my property but also made sure that no one would be able to manipulate the system like that again. I'd taken back control. It wasn't just about winning this battle. It was about standing up for what was right and showing that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, they can't take what belongs to you. The aftermath of Karen's removal was a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The community slowly returned to normal, the fear and tension that had hung over the neighborhood for so long finally starting to fade. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this victory wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who had been silenced, everyone who had been afraid to speak out. I wasn't the only one who had been pushed to the edge by Karen and the HOA. There were other neighbors too, who had felt the sting of unfair fines, unreasonable demands, and the constant pressure to conform to Karen's idea of what was acceptable. They had all been watching, waiting to see if I would back down. And now, as I stood in the middle of my land, feeling the warmth of the sun on my back and the gentle breeze rustling the trees, I knew I had done more than just protect my property. I had given them hope. It wasn't just about owning land anymore. It was about fighting for justice, fighting for a community where people didn't have to live in fear of their neighbors or an oppressive board. The phone call came one afternoon, just a few weeks after Karen's downfall. It was from the local newspaper. "Jack, we'd like to do a piece on what happened with the HOA. The way you stood up to them has really resonated with the community." I agreed, of course. The story needed to be told. I wanted people to know what had really gone on behind closed doors, how one person's greed and manipulation could affect an entire community. The article came out a week later, and the response was overwhelming. Letters of support flooded in from people I'd never met, thanking me for standing up and exposing the truth. A few even asked if they could help in any way, if there was anything they could do to keep the HOA from ever regaining the kind of power it had once held. It was humbling, to say the least. The article sparked a movement. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak out were now sharing their stories, standing up for themselves, demanding change. The local council started receiving calls about reforming HOA regulations, making sure there were checks and balances in place to prevent future abuses of power. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't alone. The community had come together not just because of my actions, but because they realized they had the power to make a difference. They didn't have to sit quietly while someone tried to take control of their lives. It felt good, knowing that this wasn't just my fight anymore. This was a fight for everyone who had ever been oppressed, who had ever felt like they didn't have a voice. And as I walked around my ranch, seeing the land I had fought so hard to protect, I knew I had done the right thing. I had faced down a corrupt system and come out on top. But more than that, I had helped inspire others to do the same. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would always be people like Karen, people who sought to take power for themselves. But I had learned one thing for sure. No matter how strong they seemed, no matter how many connections they had, they couldn't beat the power of a community united. And I was going to do everything I could to keep that unity alive. The days that followed felt different. It was like the air itself had changed. The tension that had once hovered over the neighborhood, thick and suffocating, was now gone, replaced with a sense of calm. People walked a little taller, smiled a little brighter, and the community started to come together in ways I had never seen before. I had won, yes, but more importantly, the community had won too. I wasn't the only one who had been a victim of the HOA's overreach. There were others, quiet neighbors who had suffered in silence, too afraid to speak out. Now they found the courage to share their stories, and together, we made sure that no one would ever feel powerless again. It was a beautiful thing to witness the shift from fear to empowerment. In the weeks after the City Council's decision to overhaul the HOA system, things began to change for the better. The new board was fair, transparent, and most importantly, focused on serving the community, not controlling it. There were no more surprise fines or threats, no more living under the shadow of Karen's rule. My property felt secure once again, and so did everyone else's. But it wasn't just about the neighborhood. It was about me too. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a true sense of peace. I could walk across my land without that nagging feeling in the back of my mind, wondering if someone was going to show up, uninvited, and try to take it from me. I was in control of my life again, and it felt incredible. The phone didn't ring as much and the emails slowed down. The legal battles were finally over, and the dust had settled. Karen had disappeared from the scene, her influence shattered. The people who once feared her no longer had to look over their shoulders. Life went on. In the evenings, I would sit on the porch of my house, the wind rustling through the trees, and watch the sun dip below the horizon. There was a feeling of satisfaction in those quiet moments, a sense of pride in knowing that I had stood my ground and protected what mattered most. But I knew I couldn't stop there. I had seen firsthand what unchecked power could do, and I wasn't about to let anyone forget the lesson. I started talking to other communities, offering advice, sharing what I had learned. The story of how I stood up to the HOA spread, and I was invited to speak at local events, helping others find their voices. Slowly, things started to change. More people were empowered to take action, to stand up for their rights, and to push back against the kinds of abuses I had fought against. What had started as a personal battle had grown into something much bigger. It wasn't just about protecting my land, Anna Marie, it was about ensuring that no one else would ever have to face what I had. The community that had once been torn apart by fear and control was now united, stronger than ever. And as I stood on my property, looking out over the land that had been through so much, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. This was more than just a victory over Karen or the HOA. It was a victory for justice, for fairness, and for the power of standing up for what's right.